Hi there everyone, this is Friar Rick at Assumption. We're just about to start. We're getting our last few minutes of things together and looking forward to being with you and talking to you. Tonight we'll be talking about holy orders, so hopefully you're ready and hopefully you can hear me. Is the microphone on now?
Yeah.
Okay. We're trying a new microphone out, and so Adam is behind the phone. We're using what kind of phone is it?
It's an iPhone 8.
It's an iPhone 8 and a new microphone. Hopefully it does what it can. There's also the air conditioner we're going to turn off so that we can be a little bit more readily heard. Then we have an audience of one in vivo, in live. Friar Juan is with us, and maybe other people will join us. But we're super happy that so many of you eventually join us and watch either live or at your own leisure, which is the whole point of this experience. So, how's it going?
It's great. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
You are looking very snazzy tonight.
Well, you know, I'm normally in my habit, if not in casual clothing, and I thought since we're talking about holy orders, I would wear the traditional Roman collar, but a little bit off. I'm wearing jeans and a blue collar, blue shirt, which is kind of more casual and more fun, which I sometimes do. And we can talk a little bit about that as we go on about why I wear the collar when I wear it and why I don't, which is kind of.
Well, I'm glad you were, because this is a monumental occasion for me, and probably a lot of you who know our community and have seen Friar Rick here in the last how many years you've been here. I don't know if in the entire time that we've been friends that I've seen you wear the collar. So I'm mentally remembering all of this because this is pretty
very rare.
So we just thank you for joining us this evening for Tau Talks and the final installment of our series on the sacraments of the Catholic Church. And tonight we're going to be focusing in on the sacrament of holy orders. So if you have any questions for us when you join us live, in the comments section on the right-hand side when you're watching the video, feel free to use the hashtag question. That'll automatically pop it right up to the top, and we can answer your questions as we go. Or if for some reason you don't get to ask a question during the live session, or you're going back and watching this on a replay, leave a comment in the comment section, and we'll be checking them over the next week or so and able to go back and answer your question for you as we go. So, Rick, I'm kind of excited about this because this is the last sacrament that we get to kind of dive into, and I really get to pick your brain on this because you are obviously a priest in the Catholic Church, and so you have a lot of experience and knowledge on this. So as we talk about this, so first of all, why don't you just kind of give us that 30,000-foot overview? What is the sacrament of holy orders? What does that entail? Who are the people who get to receive the sacrament of holy orders? So I'll let you kind of go from here.
So holy orders is part of the seven sacraments of the Church. It's a weird sacrament. It's holy orders. It's one sacrament. It's the gift of being called to a vocation that is membership in an order. Not a religious order in the sense of Franciscan Benedictine, but the order of deacons, the order of presbyters, and the order of bishops. An order basically means ordered, organized. It's a grouping of people who are chosen for a specific purpose, for a special calling. And so the Church has this sacrament, and it's, in a way, it's funny because it's given to you, it can be given to you in three stages. So a permanent deacon is ordained, but a man preparing for the presbyterate, the priesthood, is first ordained a deacon, serves as a deacon for a while, then as a priest, and presumably at some point could be ordained a bishop. So here in Syracuse we have Bishop Douglas Lucia, who is a priest of the Diocese of Ogdensburg, who has been asked by the Pope to become bishop. And he's not just being transferred, he has to become ordained, he has to be ordained a bishop on August 8th here in Syracuse. And so it's a weird thing because, you know, when I made my final vows as a Franciscan, one of the prayers at the final vow, for us it's solemn vows, it's a kind of a distinction. At the solemn vow ceremony, there was a blessing, and it calls down the fullness of the sevenfold Spirit, which is kind of strange. You think, well, didn't I get that at confirmation?
Right.
And did the Spirit come to me in baptism? And then you're ordained a deacon, and they ask for the Holy Spirit to come down upon you. And again, at priesthood. It's a reminder to us that the gift of the Spirit is not quantifiable in a way. It's more of a, because God always gives himself fully to us. When God gives himself to us, it's full and unconditional. It's more about us opening ourselves to that grace. And so through the sacraments, these visible signs of invisible reality, we open our hearts, our souls, our being to that presence of Christ. So we have those three orders within the order of the Sacrament of Holy Orders.
That's awesome. So you were ordained a deacon, obviously, and then obviously ordained a priest. So that is pretty typical of all Catholic priests, right? So all Catholic priests at one point were ordained a deacon at some point, yes?
Well, now. That wasn't always the way in this case. So a lot of these roles in the church have their foundation, obviously, in the scripture and in history. So the notion of a priest and its biblical origins, in terms of our Judeo-Christian tradition, goes back to when Moses kind of blessed the tribe of Levi to be the priestly people. They were the ones charged with teaching of the faith and offering sacrifice. And throughout various cultures, you see that, right? If you look at some of those movies of, the Mayan cultures where they had to offer somebody in sacrifice, and there's always the priest that comes out and does the sacrifice. There's somebody who, on behalf of the community, offers worship and sacrifice. And so that's part of the cultic priesthood throughout human anthropology. And so in Judaism, you see that development where the priestly tribe, the priestly people, would be the ones to offer prayer on behalf of the people at the temple. In Jesus, you see a radical change. Jesus says he is the one priest, and there is now only one sacrifice necessary. No more sacrifices are necessary. God made flesh is going to sacrifice his very self for the redemption of humankind. And so all of those sacrifices are unnecessary. And anything we do today is but a share in that one sacrifice. And all of us share in the one priesthood of Christ. At our baptisms, we're ordained priest, prophet, and king. You are a priest as I am a priest. But something funky happens in the Christian tradition. They don't refer in the Bible, especially in Acts, as priests. They move away from that cultic language and they take on a very secular language. And so in the Greek, they call basically the person who oversees a community, a local community, an elder, presbyteros, a wise older man, a man of experience, a man of wisdom. So one who is meant to guide the community and preach the word, not to offer sacrifice. And so there's a very deliberate choice not to use cultic language of other religions to make a clear break and to institute a new way of looking at church leadership as one of witness by your life. And the same thing happens with bishops. They are basically, the correct word for bishop is episcopoi, and that is a supervisor of elders, right? The one who oversees a bigger section. And diakonos is a servant, a helper, one who assists. So I just, when I was studying theology, I was very taken the fact that they purposely did not use either imperial or cultic language, but rather secular language to describe the ministries of the church.
Gotcha, okay. So then, when did we start, so kind of based on the understanding that I have of like the early church's history of the priesthood, we had bishops, the original 12, who were commissioned by Jesus to lead the church, and there were many disciples who helped in the care of the many, right? And then we had the diaconate, we established as servants. Do we have kind of a clear timeline or place in history, especially in the church, where we see that separation of a bishop is in charge of a diocese or a local area, and then the establishment of the same priesthood that you share in now. Do we see that?
Presbytery.
Right, presbytery.
Yeah, it's not clear.
Gotcha.
Right? So in the Acts of the Apostles and different references in the writings of Paul, the Episcopos and the Presbyteros, the bishop and the priest, are interchangeable in the way, in the language they use. So basically a leader of the community. But as time went on, the local leader of a small area was the elder, and then one who was responsible for a more broader geographic area was the bishop. And what's important is that the bishop was seen as continuing the presence of the apostle, whereas the elder was a helper to the apostles, right? And so the bishop became the link to the other churches and the link to the apostolic succession, the link to the apostles and to Peter, and through Peter to Jesus.
Gotcha. And you brought up a term that I really think is important for us as we talk about and dive into the sacrament to address, and that's that idea, that word you used, of apostolic succession. So for those who maybe aren't totally familiar with that term and why that's so important to the Catholic priesthood, can you kind of give us what that means, that apostolic succession?
So the faith that we profess and the call of ordination and ministry is not just something that is, Latin we say, sui generis, that I just declared myself a priest. I was chosen by the Christian community to be a priest, to be a presbyter. And the church, the laity was consulted, but then a bishop, my bishop of the area where I was, upon the recommendation of the friars, because I'm not exactly a regular priest, I'm a religious priest, but basically a bishop laid hands on my head and gave me the sacrament of holy orders. It was in 1989 in Baltimore. Archbishop Borders ordained me a deacon, and then in 1990 Bishop Ed Grosch of Buffalo ordained me a priest in Toronto. Now what's unique about the apostolic succession is that this is not happening in a vacuum. So let's say my diaconate ordination was by Archbishop Borders. Well, Archbishop Borders was ordained a bishop and a priest and a deacon by another bishop. And you can trace all this hand to head, all the way back to St. Peter and to Jesus. And so, because what happens is, there's a sense of that when a priest or a deacon or a bishop acts, you're really in direct connection to Christ. The person who laid hands on my head had his head laid on by someone who all the way goes back to Jesus' actual touch. And so that succession of bishop and priests and deacons is what we call the apostolic succession. And what's vital about it is it keeps us connected to Jesus Christ. Everything has to be about Jesus Christ. And we talk about the priest, and especially the priest, because, in baptism, when we receive the sacrament of baptism, we are changed, right? We believe, unlike some of our Protestant brothers and sisters, we believe that there is a dramatic healing of our being. We talk about ontology, the very guts of our being. We are healed of original sin. We are transformed. We're not just made pleasing on God's sight, we are restored to our original goodness. We still bear some of the wounds of original sin, but we are completely restored. Okay? It's an indelible change made to our soul. And we believe that sacraments also do that. And the sacrament of holy orders marks a person forever. You can never be not a priest or a deacon or a bishop. It changes your soul. And you become a sign, your very person becomes a sacrament of Christ. You are an outward expression of a reality that's communicated. So when we talk about priests, there's a certain sacredness. The hands of a priest anointed by chrism. There's something very sacred about that.
And that's a really good point, because as we were kind of talking about and preparing for tonight, you made a mention in a conversation that we had that being a priest is not something that you do, it's literally everything that you are. It's not just the work that you do, it's absolutely everything about your being. Your public life, your private life, your work, everything you do is of priest. And I think that's one of the really important distinctions between, one of the many very important distinctions between somebody like you who serves in the church and somebody like me. So I'm what's considered a lay minister in the church. I have no official ordination. There's been no laying on of hands on me or anything like that. So I don't have any priestly responsibilities or faculties or anything like that. So we both serve in the church in a number of different ways, but you have very specific things that you do as far as your role within the Catholic Church. And I think that lends itself to a conversation that we could have really quickly about the importance of vocation.
Sure.
Because we hear this word a lot of times within the church about living out or choosing or responding to God's call to our vocation in life. So mine is a little bit different than yours. My vocation is, first and foremost, I'm a husband. So that's my job. And then one of the fruits of my vocation is God blessed us with children. So I'm a husband first, but then I'm a father that goes in line with that. So you are a priest. And so maybe you could speak a little bit to that, about that call to that vocation of priesthood, being an ordained minister of the church.
So obviously it gets a little more complicated because I'm a friar. So
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes I use that distinction to help people understand, and I fall into the trap of what I've just said we shouldn't do. So what I say to people sometimes is my life, because they say, are you a friar or a priest? Or is a friar just somebody preparing for priesthood? How does that work?
Which is something I have actually said to you in our friendship.
Should I call you friar or father, you know? And so one of the ways I describe it, which is really limps, but is that my life, my identity is as a friar. I belong to a community, a fraternity of men. We are one, we live together, we share life together, we grow old together. And that is my life. It's like my marriage, the equivalent of my marriage. It's a lifetime commitment, and they're solemn vows to each other and to God. And then I sometimes say, then what I do in terms of ministry is be a priest. But that's not accurate. It helps people understand that I have two facets to who I am as a Franciscan friar priest. But you're right, priesthood is not a job, it's an identity. It's becoming the representative of Christ, being chosen by the community to represent Christ in the community. St. Irenaeus talks about this as being the priest being the consistent walker, the presbyter. So somebody who walks with the community, not in front of it, not behind it, side by side. Someone who falls and stumbles but gets up and keeps walking, because we all do that. So a priest is not necessarily, and we know that these days, holier than anybody else. He's not necessarily worse than anybody else. But a priest is meant by his life to sacrifice his life as an icon, a sacrament of Jesus in the world. That's where it gets tricky with the sense of the question of married clergy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? For Catholics, since it's not just a job, you sacrifice yourself. You know, at Mass, you know when the priest comes in last at Mass? Because it's reminiscent of the days when they would feed the Christians to the lions. The persons to be martyred were the last ones.
Mm.
So when a priest comes in last in the assembly, he's saying, I'm willing to lay down my life. The same thing with the cardinals. They wear red because they are ready to shed their blood for the faith. So a priest is someone who is willing to lay down his life for God, for the church. And that includes not getting married, not having a lot of stuff that other people do, by their whole life to be a sacrifice.
That's great. So now you
sometimes. Sometimes it sucks. It does.
Now you kind of already touched on an issue that maybe this is a good time for us to kind of start talking about, because we kind of talked about, okay, what is the sacrament? We talked about how it's done with the imposition of hands. A lot of times, and again, we talked about it when we talked about the sacrament of confirmation. We touched on it when we talked about baptism, is that so often, especially in these kinds of sacraments, we talk about the imposition or the calling down of the Holy Spirit in these different ways, right? Like you said, different facets, these different sides of the Spirit. So we kind of, I think, have a little bit of a better understanding of the sacrament. But now you mentioned talking about some of these issues that I think that some of us have a lot of questions about and would like to discuss a little bit. And the first one, we'll start right away with this, because we've even seen in the news and in the media sometimes people misunderstanding or hearing things that maybe even like Pope Francis has said about married clergy or celibate clergy. So could you give us a little bit more insight as to, one, maybe why priests are called to celibacy within the priesthood, and maybe a little bit of history behind why the church asks celibacy as a discipline for our priests?
So, one of the things we have to remember is that the Catholic Church, Catholic means universal, is very big.
Mm-hmm.
And within the Catholic Church, there are many rites or ways of being Catholic. We sometimes have a bit of a tunnel vision here in North America, thinking that what we see, well, this is what Catholic is. But there are Catholics who are of traditionally Eastern countries, so they would have Eastern traditions. They celebrate in different languages. Their way of saying Mass and celebrating Mass is different. We have Christians and Catholics who are of Arabic descent, of Syrian descent. There are churches that are older than the Church of Rome, and they have different ways of doing things. So in the Catholic Church, the Church of Pope Francis, the church of our ancestors, there are presently married clergy. For example, if you're a Ukrainian Catholic, your priest is probably married. Okay, they can marry and then be ordained. No, they can be ordained if they're married, but they cannot marry once they're ordained.
Right.
All right. So, and they have spouses, and they work it out differently. In the Latin Rite or the Roman Rite, which I'm a part of, there were times when clergy were ordained, but then there was also a lot of problems with that. A lack of training, nepotism, family fights around stuff. And you know, we've heard all sorts of stuff about even the popes. Some of them were a little bit corrupt. And so there was a reform, and especially at the Council of Trent, there was the development of what we called seminaries, right? So seminary comes from the word seed. So you instead of having apprenticeship models of educating priests and presbyters, you had them in a place where there would be consistent training, consistent education, and they called for celibacy. So no more complications, completely dedicated to the Lord. Does that mean that a married man can't dedicate his life, or a woman dedicate her life to the Lord? Of course they can, but it's different, right? One of the things we find now in the Catholic Church, the Latin Rite, is we have some of our separated brothers and sisters of other denominations who choose to become Catholic and are married, and perhaps were ordained in another denomination, and they get brought along to the Catholic Church and are ordained Catholic priests. It kind of complicates things a little bit, but basically, celibacy is an option that the Church has enforced. It certainly will always be the case for religious life, for Franciscans, Jesuits, and the such, because we live in community. But there's really nothing that prevents the Church from saying we're going to have married clergy. It exists already, and it can be expanded.
Right. I love that you mentioned two very important things. First of all, a very important distinction that the Roman Catholic Church, the universal church that we're a part of, has this what we would call that Western or Latin Rite, which we are a part of, and then the Eastern Rite, which encompasses so many other churches. And then even within that, there's some other churches that are part still of the Catholic Church, what we would call the Catholic Church. And also, I think from a personal experience of mine, Kate, my wife, and I, when we lived in Arizona, were fortunate enough to go to the ordination, or the acceptance, I should say, of a priest from the Anglican Church who became a Catholic priest, a Roman Catholic priest who was married. He had this really long career as a priest, and he was a lawyer and stuff, and then he came into the Catholic Church under the Fraternal Society of St. Peter, I believe, is the order that brings in priests from other unions to become Catholic priests. One of them, yeah. And so that's really interesting too, that we even will bring in priests and allow them to maintain it, because that would be totally contradictory to what we believe as Christians about marriage. To say, well, you can be a priest, but you can't stay married and live.
You obviously can, right? You can. And my only concern with that thing is there are a lot of very cranky Anglican priests who don't like the fact that the Anglican Church is ordaining women, and that was a other stuff. And who don't like how the Anglican Church, or the Episcopal Church, is trying to respond to the needs of the times, and so they're jumping ship over there and becoming Catholic. I'm not sure that's always a good thing. Like sometimes you end up with some very cranky Catholic priests who don't like women, which I think has been part of the struggle with the Catholic Church as it is. And that brings us to the topic of women as for ordination. I mean, that's always been one of my biggest stumbling blocks. I studied theology at a school that fortunately is closed, the Washington Theological Union, and I studied alongside laywomen and other laymen and other religious students who were preparing for Carmelites, Trinitarians, Augustinians, whatever. And there was one woman especially, Joanne Vento was her name, who was just amazing, very smart, articulate, a real pastoral sense. She took all the same courses I did. And in all my theological studies, I could not find a compelling reason why she couldn't be ordained. Now, the church does not allow that, and I'm part of the church, and that's what we accept. And sometimes we have to accept things we don't fully understand. But the stuff that's been explained to me doesn't make sense, because basically you become an icon of Christ. And they say, well, women do not image Christ well, or adequately, I should say. But the flip side of it is, for Christ to redeem us, he has to embrace all of who we are. What he doesn't embrace, he doesn't redeem. So he must embrace all of womanhood as well as all of malehood to redeem women. So if he embraces, it gets kind of tricky. One of the cardinals of Montreal, Cardinal Turcotte, who was a Cardinal Archbishop, a farmer, basically he said, well, that's the reality of the church. But he said, I'm a country boy, and sometimes in the woods, a tree would fall and block your path. You can either sit and stare at the tree and complain about it, or you can get back in your buggy or your car and go around the tree and get to the same destination. So in other words, right now this is the reality of our church, and Pope Francis is certainly open to studying it. He's asked the theological commissions to study more about the diaconate as a possible vocation for women. But it doesn't stop the fact that many, many, many women are so active in ministry and really engage their baptismal priesthood in service to the church. And we wouldn't exist today if it wasn't the women of faith that pass on the faith and care for our parishes the way they do.
Sure, absolutely. I think one of the only ways I've ever really heard it explained to me was I heard a professor talking about it one time, and just really saying these are the things. This is the thing that Jesus chose. He for whatever reasons he did chose these 12 men, and they chose men, and so this is one of those big T tradition things that we fall under. But I definitely agree with the idea that I'm being honest, it's a stumbling block for me as well, because I know many great women who have pastoral hearts who can serve the church absolutely.
Well, because as you said, Jesus was not bound by his culture. I mean, he was bound by some of the cultural realities of his time, but he also broke a lot of those things, right? He talked to the Samaritan woman. He did a lot. He ate with sinners. He healed people on days that he's not supposed to do that. He was not afraid to break convention and tradition in order to do what he needed to do. So that is the only part of the argument that makes sense. Jesus did not choose women, and he certainly had amazing women around him. Mary Magdalene was one of those people, and so many others. And in the life of Paul, so many women who supported him and helped him, but Jesus didn't choose women. So there is that argument, and he could have.
Right.
Jesus was not afraid to rock the boat. So.
Absolutely. So as we kind of we continue this discussion a little bit, I know that you and I both, when we were talking about this and praying this over, felt like there was a real need for us to address certain things, especially in the news and contemporary times about the priesthood. Specifically, we wanted to kind of touch, I know that you had some really good thoughts about the priesthood and the current abuse crisis that we see in the church. And I just wanted to kind of give you an opportunity on the platform to kind of share those thoughts, because I think that those are really relevant to understanding the core of the priesthood and where those things kind of, where we are with those things, especially in the church.
I gotta say that my foot is falling asleep, so I'm a little bit. When we read the paper about the clerical sexual abuse scandal, it's devastating, right? It's devastating because it's not just another hired person who works for the church who happens to commit a crime and a sin. It's a person whose very life, not their job, their very life is to be a sacrament of Christ. So that's why it's such a horrible betrayal, because if you can't trust a priest, who can you trust?
Right.
And nowadays, people don't trust priests, not with their kids. And that's devastating. And it's devastating for parents, but it's devastating for us who are priests as well, because I love kids, right? And in the parish when we have kids, and to hug them and to embrace them and to love them and to support teens and to support young women and young men. But now I have to always look and say, how is this going to be perceived? You know, I know it's in my heart, right? I love people, but I love them with respect and with kindness. I would probably kill anybody who tried to hurt a child, you know? So, and God forbid somebody confesses in the confessional, because I don't know what I would do. But the issue, and we talked about this in other town talks, the issue around sexual abuse is not about sex, right? Sex is the way it gets demonstrated, so it's not, it's primarily an issue of power. So, and there's distinctions between somebody who abuses a adolescent person or a post-adolescent person versus abusing a prepubescent child or a very young baby, God forbid. There's all differences, but ultimately it speaks to an arrested development of the person where his or her sexual development did not proceed like normal, and they want to relate to people that is not of their age, their chronological age, but of their emotional age. And the other factor is that they want to have control over them. And part of that gets exercised through sexual dominance, but it's really this really messed up sense of power. So I think we have to be careful of that. The flip side of that, which Pope Francis has addressed, is what we call clericalism. So this sense that Father is special. And it's weird because, yes, Father is special, you know? So many people, especially from cultural traditions, will kiss the palms of my hands, right? My hands are anointed for healing, for whatever. Some people put the priest on a pedestal. And sometimes the priests put themselves on the pedestal. And in the church, there's been a sense of, well, I am a priest, you know. You should give me your service for free. You know, I am the priest. I am above everyone else. And there was a bit of that promotion for a while. And a sense that clergy in the church doesn't play by the rules. We don't have to. We're special. We're unique. We've sacrificed so much. And it starts messing with your head, right? You think that you can do anything you want, and you don't answer to anyone. And I think that unlimited, unfettered power is very dangerous. And Pope Francis reminds us that we are not managers, we are not lords, we are meant to be servants. And not Pope Francis, Jesus reminds us that leadership is service, right? And so I think that's something else that we have to look at as a church, is the exercise of power. How can we share more with the laity, share real power, so that priests and bishops can be more accountable for what they do? It's complicated, but I think unless we tackle that side of it, we'll never deal with this problem completely.
Right. And I think that so often we hear people's frustration and their hurt, especially in this time in the church's history. And I think that one of the really important things for me was, again, in talking with you and talking with other friends of mine who are priests, is it's two things. One, that we never minimize the experiences that people have had when they've been hurt or injured. Like so many times I hear people, like I see on Twitter or something like that, like people saying like you don't leave Peter because of Judas. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that is, to me, it seems like it's so glib and it's so reductive. It's so reductionist to just like come up with these sayings or slogans around something really horrible like that. But I think it's really important for us as Catholics to realize, like, within our faithfulness to the church and our love for the priesthood, we can be angry, we can be upset, and we can ask questions, and we can demand change. Not to say, like, let's dismantle the priesthood, or that getting rid of celibacy is going to fix the issue, because neither of those things are a solution.
No, because, other denominations that have married clergy have the same or higher rate of abuse by the clergy. Mm-hmm. So it's not celibacy.
Right. And also, I'll even hear people say things like, one of the leading perpetrators of sexual abuse in any profession or little v vocation is dentists. But then again, that's not a reason for us to dismiss what's going on within the church.
Yeah, your doctor, your dentist are also sacred professions, right? We trust. But priests are supposed to be above that all. And, Pope Francis says it well. Priests are like airplanes. They only make the news when they crash. Right. So all the planes that ride and all the priests that do well, nobody hears about or seldom hears about. But we can't diminish the impact that even one case happens. The ripple effects are horrific. And you see it in, I don't want to be crass about it, but you see in the collections, people stop giving to the church because they think, I don't want to support the institution.
Sure. The other thing too that I really I felt like it was important for me to kind of share my experience with priests is, I think it's really important for us within the laity to be willing and open to have real friendships with priests. Now, I know that there has to be a certain amount of professionalism and even a little bit of distance simply because of, making sure that everything is proper and in order. But, like you and I, you've come to dinner with my family and I, we've hung out and had conversations as friends and stuff like that. And I think that part of dismantling the clericalism that we've built around the priesthood is to make sure that priests feel a part of the community. Because I think that sometimes, I know in my parents and my grandparents' generation, I told my grandma that one of my friends was a priest, and she was like, "What are you talking about?" When the first time my grandmother, my 93-year-old grandmother, heard that I went to a bar and restaurant, and had a beer with a priest, I thought that was the thing that pushed her into heaven. She just was so freaked out with the idea of me being friends with a priest, because she was never born that way. She was never brought up in that kind of a culture. But I think that, to me, and in our experience as a family, those are some of the best relationships that we have are with you guys, and being able to talk openly and honestly about life, and as some people say, do life together, not separately.
That is so important, right? In some cultures, relationships with priests are more ordinary. In my family, my parents had a lot of friends who were priests, and when they came to, my parents immigrated from Turkey. When they came to Canada, they found some of the French clergy very aloof, and they were like, "What is this about?" They were used to having friends and going out for dinner and stuff. It's very important, right? Because the priest is supposed to be, especially the pastor, is supposed to be one from among the people who inspires and helps the people of God to continue on the journey. And if he doesn't know his sheep, or Pope Francis says we should smell like our sheep, well, you got to spend time with them and connect with them at a human level. And as a religious, I'm very fortunate, because when I finish my work day, but when I'm done, I go home, I have dinner with the guys, I'll watch the news with the guys, I'll do stuff, and weekends we'll go out, right? We'll have some fun. And there's conversation and there's honesty. There's a level of intimacy in Franciscan community that allows for heart-to-heart sharing. On Thursdays we have faith sharing, we have monthly meetings where we gather, we talk about what's going on in our lives. And if I'm acting weird in the parish, or if I'm doing stuff, or if I'm preaching stuff, and the guys will tell me, you're full of crap. You don't even do that yourself, and here you are preaching this. There's a reality check, right? And I'm afraid that for some clergy who live alone, who don't have any kind of feedback, their whole life is basically doing what they want. And it could be destructive. But if they have friends, people who, will care for them. Most of our priests are so freaking lonely and need people to love them and care for them and accept them. They have their family and stuff, but people will always tell you what's wrong, but very few will tell you what's right. So to have somebody who will take you out for a beer, talk to you, And then when necessary, say, hey, you came off a little strong this thing, or maybe you could have worded that differently, or, I noticed you aren't really preparing your homilies. They're kind of all over the place. It's super important. Reality check, dude. We're humans. We need that. We get lost sometimes. We make mistakes. That's why priests go to confession. That's why the Pope goes to confession. If there's nobody to talk to us, and especially once you become the pastor of the parish, very few people tell you the truth. And so they'll complain sometimes, mostly behind your back. That doesn't help. I know in my own personality, I'm very extroverted. I'm pretty dominant. People can be afraid, but I'm always open to feedback, and I'll accept it very humbly.
Awesome. So as we kind of wind down the conversation about holy orders, we talked about its biblical roots. So there is a biblical basis for the Catholic priesthood as we understand it and where it comes from, and then that threefold ordination that a man can be a part of. We talked about that there's an importance, especially within your community, because we are a Franciscan community, that there's an importance within your community that you identify as a friar. You're part of that Franciscan community, but you are also ordained to the priesthood. There are men who are like Friar Juan, who's with us tonight. He's a deacon. He's going to be, hopefully, God willing, ordained a priest in the next year and a half or so. There are men within your community also that are not priests, but there's not that doesn't make anybody special. I know, like I mentioned before, in the very early goings of our friendship, I said something to the effect of, is he a priest as well, or is he just a friar? And you're like, hey, wait a minute, that's not the cool thing to say, man. But we talked about those things. We talked about the history of the establishment of the priesthood, and I'm glad that we got to talk about some of these kind of hot button issues that revolve around the ministry of priests. Is there anything else that you kind of wanted to add as like a closing or a final thought when it comes to this?
Well, I'll talk about my collar.
Yeah,
sure. You would know that most of the time I wear casual clothes in the office. If it's something liturgical or official, I wear my habit. The habit is from the 1300s. It's in the form of a T, a tau, a cross, with a rope around it. It's something that St. Francis wore, sort of the same look. And it's something that you can wear working at a food pantry and meeting the Queen of England. It's a very versatile kind of garment, and it covers a multitude of sins. You can gain 5 pounds, lose 5 pounds, it still fits. So that's always very helpful. And it's not that hot because you can wear shorts underneath. So if I'm doing something, I tend to wear my habit rather than a clerical shirt. Here's why. A clerical shirt says priest to people. And immediately they conjure or they image a very clerical mindset, a very rigid view of faith and authority. As friars, we're called to be brothers, lesser brothers. And so I try to avoid symbols of authority and go more with fraternal symbols. Now, the other thing is that habits, religious habits, most sisters don't wear them. A lot of men's communities don't wear them. Again, people see you in a habit, they think, oh, you're kind of a freak or like super conservative kind of community. The only ones who get away with it tend to be the friars, because people know we're down to earth. Even if we're wearing our habits, we're just us, right? We're a mess. Franciscans are we call our spirituality seraphic confusion. We follow the gospel as best we can, like you do too. All of us are in the same boat, and so we like to see ourselves as brothers. And so I and many friars try to wear the habit more than the collar, but sometimes you need the collar for when you need quick. Like if I'm going to the hospital at 2 a.m., I need to get in to anoint somebody, I'll wear a collar to be immediately recognizable as a priest.
Sure.
But it's there are, here in Syracuse, there are such dedicated men who are diocesan priests, regular priests, and especially some of the young guys. We had them over for our neighbor's goodbye dinner, and they are just such balanced and healthy young men, very kind and compassionate. I'm very hopeful, and I see a lot of amazing young men considering priesthood. I hope that we continue to hold high standards and not get desperate, because that's the worst thing we can do. And to ask a lot of our priests. It's okay to challenge them, but it's important for us to pray for vocations. And if you're listening, or if you know somebody who is a young man who is considering giving of himself in life, it's important that you respond or that you invite them to think about the priesthood, whether as a part of a religious order or of a diocese. I have to tell you that I love being a priest. I love being a friar, and I also love being a priest. To be present to people, to help craft and care for them at the moment of death, and be there for them, to help them with their funerals, their weddings are a bit drama, okay? Most priests will tell you they'd rather do 5 funerals rather than a wedding. Because, you got mother-in-laws and bridezillas and groomzillas. It can be a pain. But ultimately, it's beautiful. I just did a baptism the other day, and I got the most wonderful message back. It was a complicated situation, and we tried to help the family and involve the other kids. And the family wrote back and said they were so grateful that I put my heart into it, that I didn't just blah blah, just say the words, right? And that's what being a priest means, putting your heart out there for people. And so I would encourage anybody who's considering it to really pursue a vocation to both religious life and to priesthood. You will be greatly rewarded. I have been.
That's awesome. And just on a personal note, as somebody who, I'm a married man, and I've been married for 8 years, but prior to getting married, I was discerning priesthood. I was actually accepted to seminary, and I was going to study to be a priest, and then a beautiful woman showed up in my life, and the rest is history. But one of the biggest encouragements that I think that we can give anybody who is watching or listening to this, and they have somebody in their life and their family who's considering making that choice, 2 things. One, like Rick said, continue to pray for them, and don't be afraid to have a conversation with them about a life around service, around the priesthood. And 2, don't be afraid to learn more about it. I think one of the things for me, the best thing that I learned when I spoke with my diocesan director of vocations is none of this, as you are exploring this option, means that you're already signed up. Like you haven't. It's not like joining the army where you show up and you sign your life away on a piece of paper and you have to do a certain tour of duty. So many men have that thought, or maybe have that calling within them, but then they don't respond because they think like, well, if I go talk to somebody about this, if I learn more, if I go visit a seminary, then all of a sudden it's over with and I'm there. And that's totally not the case. And there are great men who I know who had second vocations as priests. They were husbands and fathers and grandfathers, and their spouse died, and then they became priests. And then I know a lot of guys who were young and they didn't follow. They discerned that wasn't their path. But just showing so much grace, as much grace as you possibly can, to the men in your life who may be discerning that decision. Just give them the freedom to work that out, to pray about it.
To be priests, to be permanent deacons, if you're over 35 and want to serve the church that way. I would say, if you're interested at all, as you said, give it a try. Especially with the friars, it takes like 8 years of formation, and there's lots of steps where you can say, you know what, this really isn't for me. Nobody wants to drag somebody into a vocation that's not theirs. That's not going to work, right? Because if somebody convinces you and hijacks you and forces you into it, you're going to be unhappy. Well, reality is I have to live with you. And so if you're unhappy, I'm going to be unhappy. So we'd rather people go and leave rather than be unhappy. We have a great website. Well, first of all, at the Assumption website, there's a section on vocations. You can check it out there, AssumptionSYR.org. There's links to different organizations. But if you directly want to learn more about the Franciscans, go to Franciscans, the S at the end.org. Franciscans.org, and there's all sorts of information about our order.
Definitely explore all of that information. As we kind of wrap up here, just a couple of reminders about some upcoming stuff here at Assumption. This is actually the last one of our series on the 7 sacraments of the church. And going forward with Tau Talks, we want to know what you guys want to hear about. So you guys had asked us about the sacraments, and we went ahead and went through all those 7 sacraments. So if you have any thoughts or ideas about anything that you'd like to hear us share about, any discussions you'd like to have about whether it's something directly related to faith, maybe it's a current issue that you wanted to maybe hear about the church's perspective on, whether it's a big theological thing or maybe it's just about life, whatever it is that you have in mind. Feel free to reach out to us like Friar Rick. Visit our website, AssumptionSYR.org, and there's a tab right there under Get Connected for Tau Talks, and there's a button you can click and you can send an email right to us and give us a topic. Let us know what you want to hear about. We're more than happy to put something together just for you about what you want to hear about for Tau Talks. Same thing, feel free to connect with us on social media. It's Assumption SYR across all social media. So Facebook.com/AssumptionSYR. Well, if you're watching this, you're already there. You can also follow us on Twitter, AssumptionSYR, and then also same thing on Instagram. We also post a lot of different stuff, updates about what's going on in the parish. Feel free to follow us and listen to our podcast. We do a weekly podcast of our homilies. We just had a great one from our guest, Friar Juan, who's with us for a while. He gave a great homily this last Sunday, so feel free to find that on anchor.fm/Assumption, or anywhere you listen for podcasts. Just look for the Assumption Church podcast.
Yeah, we're on iTunes.
I know.
Assumption's on iTunes.
That's right. So you can find us on iTunes, on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Overcast, anywhere that you get podcasts, you can search for Assumption Church Podcast. It'll pop right up. And so lastly, a quick plug on my end. Coming in September is we have our next Alpha course, and I just wanted to give 60 seconds to talk to you guys about Alpha, and then you can close this out, right? Alpha is an experience, it's an opportunity that we have for us to share our Christian faith with those who maybe don't believe the same things that we believe. Maybe they haven't been in church for a while. They've got big questions about life and meaning and purpose. We're going to be starting Alpha here in September at Assumption. If you have any questions about Alpha, again, go to our website. There's a Get Connected tab and there's an info about Alpha. We're going to have all the information for registration. All you need to do is come as you are. There's no prerequisites. There's sign up only in the sense because we like to feed you. When you free food. There's free food every night. So for 10 weeks you get a free meal every night. So even if you just want to come and get some good food, come hang out and have some good food and some good coffee and meet some new friends. So go to that Get Connect tab, go to Alpha. You can sign up through there. We only get that sign up going for head count for food purposes. We don't market anything to you. We don't sell you anything. We don't make you become a parishioner afterwards or anything like that, excuse me. But yeah, I would just love to see you guys. Rick and I would love to see you guys at our next Alpha course. So Rick, what do you got for us?
Goodbye. It's hot.
It's very hot in here. He's wearing the Roman collar. He wants to get out of that as soon as possible. So guys, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you again here, Facebook Live next month for Tau Talks Live.
Bye. See ya.